The story begins in the shining glass tower of one of Tokyo's largest companies. A place where men in suits walked with quick steps and spoke with sharp voices. A place where every minute was worth millions, and every mistake could mean ruin. At the very top of this tower sat a man feared and admired in equal measure. The Japanese CEO. A man who had built an empire with his clever mind and unshakable confidence. His name alone was enough to make his employees stand straighter and his competitors nervous. He was known for his wealth, his power, and above all, his arrogance. He believed no one could match his intelligence, and sometimes he liked to remind everyone of that fact. On a warm afternoon, the boardroom was filled with his top executives, men and women who had spent years in universities, experts with degrees and achievements. Yet all of them sat quietly while the CEO leaned back in his chair with a grin. On the long table in front of him lay sheets of paper, charts, and equations, numbers that had been troubling the company for months. It was a problem so complex that even the brightest consultants had failed to solve it. The executives were nervous. They had worked day and night and still no answer. They knew the CEO hated failure, and now he was in a mood to play. He tapped the paper with his finger and said loudly, almost mocking the room, "Here is the problem. None of you can solve it, not even with all your expensive degrees and long nights." His words were sharp, and though he smiled, everyone could feel the sting. Then he leaned back, laughter bubbling in his chest. "Solve this, and I'll give you $100 million. His voice echoed in the grand room. The promise was so ridiculous that it almost felt like a joke. A dare that no one could ever win. The executives glanced at each other. Some smiled nervously. Some lowered their heads. No one dared to speak. No one dared to laugh too loudly. For they knew their boss well. He was not just arrogant, he was unpredictable. He could lift someone up with praise one day and crush them with anger the next. His challenge was not meant to be real. It was meant to humiliate, to remind them that they were all beneath his towering intellect. He laughed louder, his teeth flashing, the sound filling the silence of the room. It was not a laugh of joy, it was a laugh of superiority. Outside the room, whispers began to spread. The CEO's challenge quickly became a story shared in hushed voices by employees across the building. The cleaners, the assistants, the security guards, everyone heard about it. "Solve the problem and he'll give you $100 million. They said to each other. Some laughed, some rolled their eyes, for who could ever hope to solve something that had beaten the best? Yet the story grew, because it was not every day that the most powerful man in the company made such a bold declaration. The CEO himself enjoyed the way people talked about it. He liked the idea that his problem was so great that it was untouchable, unsolvable, something only he could understand. He felt untouchable himself, as if he stood on a mountain and the rest of the world was crawling at the base. Sometimes he would even mention it at dinners with business partners, chuckling as he told them, "I told my people, solve it and I'll pay $100 million. None of them could even come close." And his guests would laugh with him, though some wondered silently if this man's pride would ever meet its match. What made the challenge sting even more for his workers was the amount, $100 million. It was not just money, it was a dream, it was freedom for generations, and yet it was dangled in front of them like a toy they could never touch, a cruel reminder of the distance between the CEO's world and theirs. For him it was just a joke. For them it was a number so huge it could change entire lives. Still, inside the company, there were whispers of hope. Some of the younger employees would gather after hours, scribbling on papers, trying to at least understand the problem. Not for the money, for they knew the CEO would never truly give it, but for pride, for the chance to prove that his arrogance could be challenged. Yet no matter how many hours they spent, the problem remained unsolved. Like a locked box with no key, the CEO watched their quiet desperation with amusement. He enjoyed seeing them try and fail. It fed his ego. This was the stage on which the story began. A powerful man with a sharp laugh, a challenge that sounded impossible, and a company filled with people too afraid to answer back. To them it was just another moment of humiliation, another story to whisper about in hallways, but none of them could know that the real answer would not come from a boardroom or a university. It would come from someone far outside their world, someone the CEO would never imagine. For when he laughed that day and promised $100 million, he believed his words were untouchable. He never thought for a second that a child, the son of his maid, was about to change everything. Far away from the shiny glass boardrooms and the loud laughter of the CEO, there was another world, quieter, humbler, yet filled with struggles that most people in suits never even thought about. This was the world of the maid who worked in the CEO's grand mansion, a woman who rose before the sun, tied her worn scarf around her hair, and carried her old cleaning bag to the bus stop. Every day she traveled across the busy city to reach the place where she worked. The place that glittered with chandeliers and marble floors. The place where her hands scrubbed silently while others enjoyed comfort. She was not seen by many, not truly seen, for people often looked past her as though she were part of the furniture. She moved from room to room, polishing, sweeping, arranging, always careful never to disturb the peace of her wealthy employer. The CEO barely noticed her, for to him she was just another worker, invisible, unimportant, someone who blended into the background. But for her, this job meant survival. Every coin she earned fed her family. Every long hour meant her son could stay in school. Her world was built on sacrifice. And though she carried her burdens quietly, her eyes always rested with love on her child. Her son was the bright spot in her difficult life, a boy with curious eyes and a quick mind. Though they lived in a small, cramped apartment with peeling paint and thin walls, he filled the home with questions, laughter, and dreams. He loved to read old books, to draw numbers and patterns, to stare at the stars at night and wonder about the mysteries of the universe. Sometimes the mother would smile sadly, thinking how unfair life was, such a sharp mind trapped in poverty, while the wealthy often wasted opportunities. Still, she encouraged him, telling him that no matter how small they were in this world, knowledge could give him wings. The boy often accompanied his mother to the mansion when she had long hours. He would sit quietly in the kitchen or the staff quarters, sketching in his little notebook while his mother worked. He had grown used to the grandness of the house, the tall ceilings, the endless hallways, the way everything seemed too shiny to touch. He never dared to wander far, but his ears were always open, listening to conversations drifting from rooms he could not enter. One evening, as he waited for his mother to finish, he overheard a group of workers whispering excitedly. They spoke about the CEO's bold challenge, solve his impossible problem and win 100 million. Their voices were half mocking, half amazed. But to the boy, it was like a spark that lit a fire inside. He leaned closer, his heart beating faster. He wanted to know more. What was this problem that even the smartest men could not solve? What puzzle could be so big that it made a rich man laugh at everyone else? When his mother returned to check on him, he asked her softly, "Mama, what is the problem they are talking about?" She looked tired, brushing dust from her apron, and shook her head. "It's not for us to think about, my son. It's only for rich people, not for us." But the boy could not stop thinking about it. He had always loved challenges, and this one felt like a giant mountain calling his name. That night, when they returned home, the boy could not sleep, while his mother prepared a simple meal of rice and vegetables. He took out his notebook and began scribbling numbers, patterns, and shapes, of course. He did not know the full details of the CEO's problem, but from the pieces he had overheard, he began to imagine. He thought in ways no adult would, free from fear, free from the weight of failure. He let his mind wander, and with every line he drew, his excitement grew. His mother watched him from across the room, shaking her head with a small smile. She knew her son's mind was different, brighter, hungrier. The next day, while working in the mansion, the maid noticed how the CEO and his guests laughed again about the challenge. As if it were a game only they were allowed to play, she felt a sting in her chest, for she knew how many people could have their lives changed with even a fraction of that money. She thought about her son's old shoes, his worn-out school bag, the bills she could barely pay. 100 million was not just a number for her. It was a dream too far to even touch, and yet it dangled in front of them like a cruel joke. Her hands scrubbed harder against the marble floors, her heart heavy with the unfairness of life. Still, her son's determination did not fade. Every day he grew more curious. Every night he filled his notebook with scribbles and ideas. Sometimes he would proudly show her, his eyes shining. "Mama, look, what if the answer is like this?" She would laugh softly, smoothing his hair. "You are too young, my child. This is not for us." But deep inside, she wondered, what if his strange, bright mind could see something that others missed? What if the world was waiting for him to surprise them all? The maid's world was filled with hard work and silence. Yet within it lived the seed of something extraordinary. Her love for her son gave him courage. Her sacrifices gave him strength. And though she did not know it yet, the walls of that mansion, the laughter of that arrogant CEO, and the whispers of an impossible challenge were about to collide with her son's imagination. In ways that would shake their lives forever, the world saw her as invisible, but soon, her child would make them all. Seeth Boy could not forget the words he had heard in the mansion. They echoed in his young mind like a riddle that refused to stay quiet. The CEO's voice, sharp and proud. "Solve this and I'll give you 100 million." It sounded almost like a fairy tale, but the boy did not laugh. Instead, his heart beat faster whenever he thought of it. His imagination painted the problem as a giant locked door, and he wanted to be the one to find the key. While others shrugged it off as impossible, he saw it as an adventure, something meant to be tried, even if it scared him. At school, he sat in the back of the classroom, his worn uniform neat but old, his shoes scuffed, yet his mind was far away. While the teacher wrote on the blackboard, the boy scribbled in his notebook. Lines, numbers, and strange shapes filled the pages. He wasn't just copying, he was experimenting. His small fingers tapping the pencil against the desk as his brain danced with possibilities. Other children played with toys, chased balls, and laughed loudly. But he was happiest when he was lost. In thought, exploring problems no one asked him to solve. Puzzles made him feel alive. At night, while his mother cooked or stitched old clothes by the dim light of their small lamp, the boy would spread his notebook on the table. He would stare at the pages for hours, turning the problem around in his head, looking at it from angles no one else dared to try. He didn't care about the money. He didn't even fully understand how much 100 million really was. What mattered to him was the challenge, the mystery, the chance to prove to himself that no puzzle was beyond his reach. His little mind was free, untouched by the fear of failure that tied down grown-ups. His mother often watched him with both pride and worry. She loved how bright his eyes became when he explained his strange ideas, how his small hands moved in the air as though he were painting invisible answers. Yet she worried too, worried that life would crush his dreams the way it crushed so many others. "My son," she would say softly, "do not carry the weight of rich men's problems. Your job is only to study, to stay kind, to grow." But the boy would shake his head, his voice quiet but firm. "Mama, maybe the answer is simple. Maybe no one sees it because they think too big. I want to try." Sometimes he sat by the window of their tiny apartment, looking out at the city lights, towers, and billboards glowing in the distance, and he imagined those towers filled with men in suits, bending over papers, sweating, failing, giving up. He smiled at the thought that maybe, just maybe, a child like him could see what they couldn't. He did not see himself as small. He saw himself as different, and that difference made him bold. He believed that answers were hidden everywhere, in the stars, in the cracks of walls, in the rhythm of raindrops. All one had to do was listen closely. Days turned into weeks, and his notebook grew heavier with ideas. Messy lines, arrows, and circles filled every page. Sometimes he stayed up so late that his mother had to gently take the pencil from his hand, urging him to sleep. "You will make yourself sick, my boy," she whispered, covering him with a thin blanket. But even in dreams, his mind chased after solutions. He dreamed of numbers floating in the air, of puzzles unraveling like threads, of doors opening with keys only he could see. One afternoon, as his mother worked in the mansion, he sat again in the kitchen corner, his notebook open on his lap. Nearby, some workers gossiped about the CEO, laughing about his arrogance, repeating his words with mocking tones. "Solve this and I'll give you 100 million. The boy's ears perked up, his heart thumping. Every detail they mentioned became fuel for his imagination. He wrote quickly, afraid to forget, his hand shaking with excitement. He felt like a treasure hunter, gathering clues, each word another piece of the map. He was not afraid to make mistakes, he welcomed them. When one path led nowhere, he simply drew another line, tried another shape, asked himself another question. Failure did not frighten him. It only pushed him to try again. Perhaps that was what made him different from the experts who had already given up. They feared humiliation. They feared losing face. But the boy had nothing to lose, only curiosity to guide him, and curiosity was stronger than fear. Slowly, the boy began to see patterns, connections that made sense in his childlike way. He believed that if he could just find the right path, The puzzle would open up. It felt almost like a game, one that grew more exciting each day. The more he worked, the more he believed it was possible, while the world laughed at the challenge. He took it seriously, because deep inside he felt something, a small voice telling him that he could be the one to solve it. The maid, his mother, sometimes sighed, sometimes smiled, torn between worry and wonder. She never imagined that her child, sitting with a second-hand pencil and a torn notebook, could be preparing to do what wealthy men with computers and calculators could not. She never imagined his curiosity could carry him into the heart of a storm that would soon shake both their lives. But the boy felt it, even if he couldn't explain it. He felt destiny pulling him toward something larger than himself. And so, in the quiet nights of their small apartment, in the corners of the mansion's kitchen, in the spaces between chores and homework, the boy's curiosity grew into determination, determination grew into obsession, and obsession became the spark that would soon light the fire. He didn't know it yet, but his curiosity was no longer just a child's game. It was the beginning of a story that would bring silence to the laughter of a powerful man, and change the course of their lives forever. The boy's notebook was no longer just filled with scribbles. It had become his secret world, page after page of numbers, patterns, arrows, and ideas. To him it was not a mess. It was a map, each line a step closer to the answer he believed was hidden somewhere. His mother often shook her head when she saw him bent over it. His small shoulders hunched, his pencil worn down to the stub. She told him again and again that it was foolish to think about the CEO's challenge, that such things were not meant for children, not meant for people like them. But the boy's determination did not fade. Instead, it grew stronger each day. One evening, as his mother prepared dinner in the mansion's staff kitchen, he tugged at her sleeve, his eyes bright. "Mama," he whispered, "I think I have something. I think I can solve it." She paused, staring at him with tired eyes, her hand still holding the ladle. At first she wanted to scold him, to tell him to stop wasting time on the impossible. But when she looked at his face, so full of excitement and innocence, her heart softened. She sighed and said gently, "My son, it is too big for you. Don't get your hopes up." But he shook his head, clutching his notebook to his chest. "Just let me try, please, I only want to try." That same evening fate played a strange trick. The CEO had returned home earlier than usual, bringing with him a few important guests, men in suits who walked with pride and women with sharp eyes who whispered into their phones. The air in the mansion felt heavy with importance, and the staff moved faster, polishing glasses, preparing trays, making sure not a single mistake happened under the watchful eye of their master. The boy, sitting quietly in the corner with his notebook, could hear laughter and voices drifting from the dining room. He knew the CEO loved to show off, to remind his guests of his brilliance. Sure enough, as the evening went on, the CEO repeated his famous challenge, his voice booming with arrogance. "Solve this problem, and I will give you 100 million. His guests laughed, shaking their heads, some amused, some amazed. It was his favorite trick, to show that even the world's brightest minds could not touch what he held in his hand. The boy's small heart pounded as he listened, his fingers gripping his notebook tightly. He felt something inside urging him, a voice that whispered, "This is the moment you cannot hide forever, show them." When the CEO entered the kitchen to fetch a drink, he noticed the boy sitting there, his small face serious, his hands covering the notebook. At first the CEO ignored him, but then curiosity lit his sharp eyes. He smirked and asked in a mocking tone, "What is this, little one? Are you drawing cartoons in that notebook?" The boy swallowed nervously, then shook his head. "No, sir, I was working on your problem." The room froze, the staff stopped moving, some gasped softly. The CEO blinked, then burst into laughter, a loud, sharp laugh that bounced off the walls. "You, a child, think you can solve what no man could," he said, shaking his head. The guests soon joined in, chuckling and whispering, some amused, others finding it ridiculous. The maid's cheeks burned with shame as she stood silently by, her heart aching for her son. She wanted to grab his hand and pull him away, to protect him from humiliation. But the boy stood firm, clutching his notebook, his small voice trembling but steady. "Please let me try." The CEO, enjoying the scene, leaned back against the doorframe, his grin wide. "All right then, let us be entertained, show "Us your magic, boy," he said, waving a hand as if granting permission. His voice dripping with mockery. The boy stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly as he opened his notebook. The room was filled with laughter and disbelief, but the boy hardly heard it. His mind was racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned the pages, showing numbers, lines, and shapes that only he could explain. His voice started small, but grew steadier as he pointed and spoke. "If you look at it this way, the numbers connect here, and this part repeats itself." But no one noticed because they were looking too far. The guests leaned closer despite themselves, the laughter fading a little as curiosity pushed in. At first, they dismissed him, rolling their eyes, but the more he spoke, the more they realized he was not rambling. His thoughts followed a path that made sense in its own strange, simple way. The boy did not use big words, he used drawings, comparisons, childlike explanations, yet somehow it worked. His innocence allowed him to see what others had missed. One of the guests frowned, leaning toward the paper, whispering, "Wait, he's on to something." Another fell silent, staring at the numbers. The CEO's smile faded slightly as he watched, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowing. He had expected nonsense, a child's fantasy, but instead he saw patterns forming, answers taking shape. The boy was not just pretending. He was showing a solution. A path no one else had dared to try. The room grew quieter. The laughter died down, replaced by whispers and surprised gasps. Even the maid, standing at the back with tears in her eyes, felt her heart pound with pride and fear. Her son was no longer invisible. He was standing in the center of the storm, holding nothing but a notebook and his courage. By the time the boy closed his notebook, his cheeks flushed, his breath short. The room was silent. No one laughed now. Even the CEO's smirk had frozen. His sharp eyes fixed on the child who had dared to step forward, for the first time. He did not know what to say, and though he still held his pride tightly, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. Had this boy, this maid's son, truly touched the edges of an answer? Had he done what others could not? The guests shifted uncomfortably, waiting, the air heavy with disbelief, and in that moment, the boy realized something incredible. The impossible was no longer untouchable. The boy stood there with his notebook open, his small hands gripping the worn pages, his voice trembling at first but growing clearer with each word. The room that had once echoed with laughter now grew quieter. The guests leaned in despite themselves, curiosity pushing away their amusement. The boy pointed at his drawings, at the numbers he had written, explaining in the simple language of a child. He compared equations to puzzles. He compared patterns to games. His innocence gave his words a strange power. He was not trying to impress, he was simply sharing what he saw. At first the CEO smirked, his arms crossed, convinced this was nothing but a silly act. But the more the boy spoke, the more his grin faltered. His sharp eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, studying the child's notes. Something about it was different. It was not random. It was not foolish scribbling. It was a thread, a path, a way of thinking that had escaped his own expensive experts. The boy's logic was raw, yet it was fresh. It did not follow the rules of textbooks, but it connected pieces in a way that made undeniable sense. The guests who had come expecting fine food and easy laughter now found themselves silent. One of them adjusted his glasses, his brow furrowed as he stared at the boy's notebook. Another shifted uncomfortably, whispering, This actually works." The room that had been filled with mocking voices now carried only the sound of the boy's pencil scratching across paper as he showed more. The maid stood at the back, her heart pounding so loudly she thought the whole room could hear it. Her son, her little boy, was standing before the most powerful man she knew, and he was holding his ground. For a moment the CEO tried to interrupt, chuckling to regain control, but even his laughter sounded thinner now. Forced, he said, "Enough games, boy." But his voice lacked the same strength as before, and the boy, with shy courage, looked up at him and said softly, "Please let me finish." Those words, simple and small, carried a weight the guests could feel. The CEO waved his hand dismissively but did not stop him, because deep inside, even he wanted to hear more. The boy's explanations were not wrapped in big words. He spoke as though he were explaining to a friend at school. But sometimes the simplest words carried the sharpest truth. He connected ideas with childlike comparisons, saying things like, "It's like when you fold a paper and the sides match," or, "It's like when you stack blocks and they fit perfectly." The guests exchanged looks, because what he said was true, it was correct, it was something the experts had missed because they were looking too high, while the boy looked straight ahead and saw clearly. Slowly the mocking expressions faded, replaced by quiet respect, disbelief mixing with admiration. One of the guests finally spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "He's right." And in that moment, the room froze, the words hung in the air heavier than any laughter. The CEO's eyes flicked toward the man, then back to the boy, his pride refusing to bow, but his silence betraying him. Everyone in the room could feel it. The balance of power was shifting. A child had shaken the confidence of a man who had built his empire on intellect and arrogance. The maid could hardly breathe. Her eyes filled with tears she struggled to hide. Never in her life had she imagined such a moment. Her son, whom the world barely noticed, was now commanding the attention of millionaires and scholars. She wanted to run to him, to protect him. But she also wanted to stand tall and let the world see what she had always known. That her boy was special, that his mind was a gift. When the boy finally stopped speaking, closing his notebook gently, the silence that followed was heavier than stone. No one dared to laugh now, no one dared to dismiss him. The guests shifted in their seats, their faces pale with shock. Some even clapped softly without realizing. A nervous, awkward sound. The boy looked down at his shoes, embarrassed, unsure if he had done something wrong, but deep inside, he knew he had spoken the truth. His small heart beat proudly, even as his hands trembled. The CEO sat still, his face unreadable, but inside him a storm was brewing. He had laughed at this boy, had mocked him, had allowed him to speak only for his own amusement. Yet now he sat confronted by something he had never expected, humility, and it burned him. It clawed at his pride. The guests were watching him closely, waiting to see what he would do, whether he would keep his promise or twist his words, whether he would honor the brilliance of a child or crush it under his arrogance. The silence stretched on, long and uncomfortable, the kind that makes people shift in their seats. The boy stood patiently, holding his notebook like a shield. His mother clutched her apron, her knuckles white, and everyone waited for the CEO to speak. But he said nothing. His mouth opened and closed, as if words had abandoned him. He, the man who always had the sharpest answers, who always had the loudest laugh, now sat speechless, his power trembling in the presence of a child. That night, long after the guests had left and the laughter had died, the story of the boy began to spread, whispers among the staff, murmurs among the guests. The maid's son solved it, the boy solved the impossible. The silence of that room would not be forgotten, because sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Sometimes silence is the sound of pride breaking, and on that night, silence was the sound of a child rising above the arrogance of a man who thought himself untouchable. The boy's voice faded as he closed his notebook, his small fingers pressing against the worn cover. His eyes dropped to the floor, unsure of what would come next. The room was heavy with silence. The laughter that once filled it had died, and in its place was something different, something no one had expected. The guests looked at one another, some with disbelief, others with awe. Even the servants who had paused their work could feel it. Something extraordinary had just happened, and all eyes turned toward the CEO. The CEO sat at the head of the long polished table, his face stiff, his hands gripping the armrest of his chair. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. For the first time in years, he was not in control of the room. He had built his life on being the sharpest mind in any space, the man with all the answers, the man who laughed at the struggles of others. But now, a child, the son of his maid, had done what his experts could not. His mind raced, trying to deny it, trying to tell himself it was nonsense, but deep inside he knew what he had seen. The boy's explanation was not random. It was not luck. It was real. The guests had confirmed it with their own eyes. Some had even whispered words he never expected to hear. "He's right." Those words echoed louder in his ears than his own laughter ever had. He shifted in his seat, his throat dry, his pride screaming inside him. How could this happen? How could a boy with nothing but a pencil and a notebook succeed where the best consultants, mathematicians, and scientists had failed? They Thought was unbearable, and yet it stood in front of him like a mountain he could not move. The maid stood at the edge of the room, her hands shaking, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She wanted to be proud, but she was afraid too, afraid of what this powerful man would do to her son now that his pride was shaken. She had seen his anger before. She had seen how sharp his words could be, how easily he crushed those beneath him. But this was different. This was no ordinary mistake. This was his arrogance torn open by a child, and no one knew how he would react. The guests waited, their gazes flicking between the boy and the CEO. They were uncomfortable, unsure whether to clap or to stay silent. The tension in the room felt like a rope pulled tight, ready to snap. The boy, small and innocent, stood in the middle of it all, his notebook hugged to his chest like a shield. His wide eyes filled with both hope and fear. He had not come for money or glory, he had only come to try, yet now, he had shaken the walls of power. Finally, the CEO spoke, his voice low, almost a growl. This is not possible, he said, his words heavy with disbelief. His eyes narrowed at the boy, searching for weakness, for a crack in his confidence. You are just a child, you cannot understand this problem, he added, though his voice trembled ever so slightly. The boy raised his head, meeting his gaze with quiet courage, and softly replied, "But I did understand, sir. I just looked at it differently." Those words, simple and honest, cut deeper than any insult. The guests shifted, some nodding slightly, for they too had seen the truth. The CEO's face flushed red, his pride battled with the reality before him. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss the boy as foolish, but he could not, because the numbers, the patterns, the connections, they all worked, and everyone in the room knew it. His laughter, once so loud, now felt trapped in his throat, replaced by something unfamiliar, something he had not felt in years. Humiliation. He clenched his fists under the table, his mind screaming, how could the son of a maid, a child from nothing, defeat me? One of the guests cleared his throat nervously. Sir, with respect, the boy has found something remarkable. The CEO shot him a glare so sharp that the man instantly fell silent, but the damage was done, the words were spoken, and the truth was alive in the room. Another guest leaned forward, her eyes wide. This could change everything, if his solution is applied, she said softly, almost to herself. The CEO's jaw tightened, his power slipping, his pride crumbling. He had no witty remark, no sharp laughter to throw back. He could only sit in silence. The boy stood still, waiting, his heart thumping, but he did not back down. His mother wanted to rush to him, to shield him, but she held herself back, knowing this moment belonged to him. The CEO looked at the boy again, his eyes burning, but for the first time, he could not look down on him. He had mocked him, laughed at him, but now he sat speechless, defeated by truth. His arrogance met its match, not by another powerful man, not by a wealthy scholar, but by a child who believed in curiosity more than fear. The room stayed heavy with silence, a silence that pressed against the CEO's chest, choking him. The boy had done the unthinkable, and though the CEO's lips refused to admit it, everyone knew. They had witnessed a miracle, a moment that would not be forgotten. The shock lingered in the air like a storm that refused to pass, and deep inside, the CEO knew his life had changed. His power no longer felt invincible. His arrogance no longer felt untouchable. For one small boy had shown him that brilliance can come from anywhere, even from the son of a maid. That night, when the guests left the mansion, they carried the story with them, their whispers spreading it beyond the walls. The boy solved it, the maid's son solved the problem. And though the CEO tried to hide his feelings behind silence, behind anger, he could not erase the truth. He was shaken, shocked, humbled in a way he never imagined, and in that moment, as he sat alone in his grand hall, his laughter echoed only in memory, replaced by the haunting realization that the world had changed forever. The room was still tense when the boy finished, his small voice gone quiet, his notebook held tightly against his chest. Everyone was waiting to see what the CEO would say, waiting to see if he would keep his word, because they all remembered his loud laugh, his bold promise. Solve this and I'll give you 100 million. It had been said with arrogance, with the belief that no one could ever touch the problem, But now a boy had done it. Not a scholar, not an expert, not a millionaire, just the son of a maid. And the silence pressed down heavier with every passing second. The guests exchanged glances, their eyes filled with disbelief, some almost smiling at the irony, others holding their breath. No one dared to speak too loudly. But the unspoken question hung in the air. Would the CEO honor his words? The boy looked up at him, nervous but brave, his wide eyes waiting for some kind of answer. His mother stood at the back, her heart racing, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. She knew her son had done something incredible, but she also knew the man. Sitting at the head of the table, she knew his pride, and she feared what that pride might do. The CEO's face was unreadable. His lips pressed tightly together, his eyes sharp but troubled. Inside his mind a storm raged. On one side his pride screamed at him to dismiss the boy, to call it nonsense, to protect his image. On the other side his promise burned like fire. His own words had trapped him. For the room was filled with witnesses, people who had heard him say it again and again, people who would carry the story far beyond his mansion. He could already feel the weight of their eyes, the weight of expectation, the weight of truth. For the first time in years, the CEO felt cornered, and he hated it. Yet he knew he could not escape. If he refused, if he mocked the boy again, the world would know, the whispers would turn into shouts, his name would be dragged into shame. But if he kept his word, if he rewarded the boy, it would mean bowing his head. It would mean admitting that brilliance did not belong only to men like him, but also to children from poor homes, to people he had ignored all his life. And that thought was almost unbearable. The boy did not speak. He simply stood there, waiting, his little hands trembling slightly, but his eyes still filled with hope. He did not even care about the money. He barely understood how much 100 million truly was. All he wanted was fairness. All he wanted was to be acknowledged. The maid's chest ached as she looked at him. She knew he had already won, because he had shown the truth, but she prayed that this powerful man would not crush his spirit with cruelty. Finally, the CEO leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the table, his voice heavy and slow. I did say it. Solve this and I'll give 100 million. The guests leaned forward, holding their breath. And now the boy has solved it. The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but they left his lips all the same. A ripple went through the room, gasps, whispers, and stunned looks. The maid covered her mouth, tears rushing to her eyes, her knees almost giving way beneath her. She could hardly believe it. Her son, the boy who once had nothing, had just earned what she could never dream of. The CEO gestured toward the boy, his voice still proud but softer now. You will not only have the reward, boy, you will have opportunities, education, doors open to you that no one else could ever give. The boy blinked, confused at first, but then a shy smile spread across his face, his small heart swelling with something he had never felt before. Recognition. His mother rushed forward, unable to hold back, wrapping her arms around him, whispering through her tears. I am so proud of you, my son, so proud. Her voice cracked with emotion. The guests watched, some even clapping quietly, moved by the sight. The news traveled quickly, faster than fire. By the next morning, whispers turned into headlines. Maid son solves impossible problem? Child genius stuns Japanese CEO? The story spread across offices, schools, newspapers, and television screens. People everywhere were inspired. Some laughed in disbelief. Others cried with hope. The world had seen something that shattered the walls of arrogance, proof that genius can be born in any place, that brilliance was not locked in ivory towers or golden offices, but could shine even from the poorest corners of the city. For the maid and her son, life changed overnight. The small apartment that had once been filled with worry now buzzed with visitors, journalists, teachers, and officials, all eager to meet the boy who had dared to face the impossible. Scholarships were offered, schools competed to teach him. Companies wanted his name attached to their work. The reward money, when it came, was more than they had ever imagined, enough to lift them from poverty forever, enough to give the boy a future where he would never again have to wonder if the world would listen to him. The boy remained humble. He still carried his notebook everywhere, still filled its pages with scribbles and patterns, because for him, it had never been about the money. It had always been about the challenge, the thrill of solving something no one else could, and though his world had grown brighter, he was still the same curious child who loved puzzles, who believed answers could be found in the simplest of places. His mother watched him with pride, her heart swelling each time she thought of how far they had come. The CEO, though proud on the outside, was shaken inside. His arrogance had been pierced, and though he would never admit it openly, he had learned something powerful. He had learned that laughter can turn into silence, that pride can turn into humility, that brilliance is not a toy to be mocked but a gift that can come from anywhere. And even as he tried to carry himself with the same sharpness, deep inside he knew he would never forget the boy, the son of his maid, who had forced him to keep his own word and change the story of his life. That moment, that single night, had changed everything. The maid's son had stepped into the spotlight of the world, and in doing so, had rewritten not only his own destiny but also the lesson of an entire nation. Brilliance has no class, no wealth, no boundaries. It can rise from anywhere, even from the quiet corners where no one is watching, and that truth, once revealed, could never be silenced again. The story of the boy spread far and wide. What had started as a joke in a shining mansion had now become a tale told across the country. Newspapers carried his picture, television channels spoke of him, and people everywhere repeated the story with amazement. The maid's son solved the impossible problem. Some said with laughter, others with tears. It became more than a story of numbers. It became a story of hope. A story that touched the hearts of ordinary people who lived quiet lives, people who had often been told that greatness was not for them. In offices and schools, children repeated his name, dreaming that they too could rise above their limits. Parents told the story to their children at night, reminding them never to give up. Even people in faraway villages spoke of it with pride, saying that this boy proved the world could change in unexpected ways. He had done what experts and powerful men could not. He had shown that brilliance was not born in wealth. It could shine in the smallest homes, in the quietest corners, in the hearts of those the world never noticed. The maid, who had spent her life scrubbing floors and washing dishes, now walked with her head higher, no longer invisible, no longer just a servant. When people looked at her, they did not see only her uniform. They saw the mother of the boy who had humbled the CEO, the mother of the boy who had inspired a nation. Her tears flowed often, not from sadness but from overwhelming pride, each time she watched her son holding his notebook, still scribbling ideas, still chasing puzzles. She felt her sacrifices had been worth everything. The boy himself remained the same curious child. He did not let the cameras or the money change him. When reporters asked how he did it, he only shrugged shyly and said, "I just looked at it differently." His words were simple, but they carried a lesson that the world could not ignore. People who once believed only wealth could buy intelligence now began to look differently at their own children, at the students in their classrooms, at the quiet ones in the back rows, who might also be carrying sparks of genius waiting to be seen. And the CEO, the man whose laughter had once filled the boardroom, the man who believed no one could ever challenge him, was no longer the same. His pride had been shaken, his arrogance humbled. For days he replayed that night in his mind, the sound of his own laughter turning into silence, the sight of his guests leaning forward, the small voice of a boy explaining what his experts could not. It haunted him and it taught him, though he never said it out loud. He had gained respect not only for the boy, but for the lesson life had forced him to learn. At his next business meetings, he was quieter, his laughter less sharp. When he spoke of challenges, his words carried a new weight, because deep inside he knew that brilliance cannot be measured by wealth or age, that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths. And though he never admitted openly that the boy had changed him, those who knew him best could see it. The edge of arrogance had softened. The man who once laughed at the impossible now thought twice before mocking anyone. Again, the guests who had been present on that night also carried the memory with them. Whenever they spoke of it, their voices lowered, their faces grew serious. They would tell others, "You should have seen it." The laughter died, the boy spoke, and we knew we were watching history. Their words spread like ripples on water, turning a single evening into a legend, one that would be remembered for years to come, not because of the CEO's power, but because of a child's courage. The boy's life transformed. Schools opened their doors to him. Scholarships poured in. Teachers praised his mind. Yet he never stopped being humble. He still walked with his mother, still helped her carry groceries, still wrote in the same old notebook. Though now he had many new ones, still he kept the first close to his heart, because that was the book where his journey began, where he proved to himself that no mountain was too high if he dared to climb. For the maid, the change was even greater. She no longer worried about unpaid bills or empty cupboards. The reward money gave her freedom, but more than that, her son's recognition gave her dignity. The world that once looked past her now greeted her with respect. She was not just a maid anymore. She was the mother of a boy who had taught even the richest man a lesson. When she walked through the market, people smiled at her, whispered her name, and she felt seen for the first time in her life. The nation itself felt the impact. Politicians spoke of the boy. Educators used his story as inspiration. Children wrote essays about him. Television programs discussed what his success meant, and slowly, a new belief grew in the hearts of the people. That talent could come from anywhere, that no one should be underestimated, that the next great mind might be living in the poorest home, waiting for someone to believe in them, and the boy became a symbol of possibility, a reminder that dreams do not belong only to the rich. The CEO, though still wealthy and powerful, was remembered differently now, not for his sharp laughter, but for the day it was silenced. He had learned the hard way that respect is not taken, it is given, and that night he had been forced to give it, not because he wanted to, but because the truth demanded it. In time, even he began to see it not as defeat but as a strange kind of gift, for the boy had reminded him of something he had long forgotten, that wisdom can wear many faces, and that humility is sometimes the greatest strength. And so the story closed where it had begun, with a challenge spoken in arrogance. Solve this and I'll give you 100 million. Words that were meant to humiliate, but ended up changing lives. The CEO laughed then, but the boy's answer turned that laughter into silence, and that silence turned into respect. Respect that echoed far beyond the walls of the mansion. Respect that carried the maid's son into history, and respect that reminded the world that greatness has no boundaries, no class, no limits. It can rise from anywhere, even from the child of a maid, holding nothing but a pencil and a dream.